About 2 years ago, I did a rundown of what you as a buyer can reasonably expect in a watch at a given price. When is it reasonable to expect a mechanical movement? At what price does a COSC certification become standard? Where do you get most bang for your buck in terms of watch, and when does brand pricing really start to kick in? Well, things have changed a lot in 2 years. Prices have moved, manufacturing quality has gone up, and micro brands aren't just direct to consumer fashion watches anymore. A lot has happened. So I'm taking a look at it all again. What should you be looking for? What can you expect? And what does best in class look like? I'm going to tell you the conclusion up front. The sweet spot is somewhere between $1,500 and maybe $4,000. Tudor is no longer the value leader. The rest of the video is about taking you through the steps that get me to that conclusion. We're talking about what goes into manufacturing, the price of parts, all that kind of stuff. Let's dive in. We start with the basics. What makes up the core production cost of the watch? Designing a watch. Taking the time to draw a design, turn it into a 3D model, build a prototype, refining the design multiple times is both a creative and technical process that takes time and money. If you're just copying somebody else's design, that cost goes down. If you're starting from scratch, it's going to take more time. And if the community has deemed that you are good at this, like a recipe, then you get to charge a lot for your designs because that's what you're good at. But even for those people that are untalented and unknown, there is a cost associated with it. Materials: steel, titanium, gold, tantalum, platinum. Materials cost money in a couple of ways. There's a base cost of the material, but the material also has a cost profile to work with. Platinum is rough on tools, and that wear and tear is priced into the material. Then there's the big bucket of manufacturing. Somebody somewhere has to buy a couple of machines. Those machines cost money. And I did a quick, lazy Google, and I could find a CNC machine that only does engraving. Depending on the model I wanted, it cost me between $9,000 and $15,000 for one. You need a lot of machines to mill, to cut, to polish, to engrave. You need tools for those machines. You need electricity, lubricants. The reality is a lot of new brands won't have the cash to buy all of those machines. It would be way too expensive because you need a certain volume in sales to recoup the investment of all those machines, all those $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 machines. Every single one you have to earn your money back on. So instead, a lot of companies reach to other factories that specialize. Those companies also have to recoup their cost for all those machines, but on their side, they have the volume that small brands don't have because they can do stuff for multiple brands. And also, side note, CNC machining is not just a question of starting up the machine. Not everything is CNC machining, but CNC machining is not just about starting up the machine. There's technique and experience involved, knowing which settings to apply, making the most optimal routes. All that kind of stuff is not something you just do. You also need people to do some things manually, like assembling large parts of the watch, but also to attend to those machines, to repair them, to check the quality. It's not a massively people-intensive industry, but you do need people. And that's what goes into the base cost of the watch. The important thing on YouTube is subscribers, and people subscribe when they enjoy the content. So if you're new here and you've made it this far, you might just be enjoying the content. If so, click the subscribe button and be notified when I put out new videos. Thanks. On top of all those base costs, you've got marketing and other costs like the HR department. If you don't market, nobody will know about your watch. If nobody knows about it, it won't sell. You can hope for word of mouth. But if you're a Swatch Group who has 33,000 employees, building a new watch and hoping that somebody will notice it in the store without you advertising that it exists is a pretty risky approach. So marketing and branding is not just a waste. It's a balance. And it's a risk because if you spend nothing, you sell nothing. If you spend a lot, then you eat into the profits of the pure watch price. Distribution also has a cost. The main distribution approaches are either direct to consumer or through some sort of reseller. So ADs. ADs have employees too. They also have stores and leases and electricity costs. So they have to make a profit as well. So if you go down that route, your watch is going to be more expensive for the end consumer than on a direct-to-consumer model because there are more people in the chain that need to make money. This is important because some people will compare a Tudor to a Christopher Ward, and some people will feel that there's a relatively large price difference and not as large a quality difference. And that's not just because Tudor or some other brand just wants to charge more. It's also because those Tudor boutiques and AD stores need to make a profit too. It's not all of the cost difference, but it is part of it. Your access as a customer to a boutique where you can try the watch out and talk to a salesperson and go down to in person when there's something wrong is a convenience for you that has a cost. Finally, taxes, tariffs, and all the rest add a cost. Those Chinese watches you can buy online for $250. Well, in the US, they were exempt from taxes and tariffs because there was an exception in the law called the de minimis exemption for products under $800. Not anymore. As of April 2nd, those products are suddenly more expensive because the tariff is there. And now here's a slightly exaggerated but not incorrect thing to keep in mind. You can't buy all the parts for one watch, sell it, and make a profit. If you're doing everything yourself, that first watch is not covering the costs of your factory, your wages, and all the machines you bought. If you're calling some factories who are doing some of those things for you, they're also not going to spin up a CNC machine to make one watch. They're going to expect you to commit to a minimum volume. So up front, you're locked into the cost of 50 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 watches before you've even sold one. Every time you introduce a new watch, you're locking in a ton of cost and crossing your fingers that you'll move all your stock, because there's no profit in the first or second or third or 10th watch. And there's no guarantee you'll sell everything that you've committed to producing. On top of that, if you make your website and you do a little bit of advertising, that cost is an upfront cost. You haven't sold anything yet, and you're already hundreds of thousands of dollars in the hole in costs. You only have a pile of unsold watches and bills to pay. So how do you price the thing? So I've got my model, 5 components: manufacturing the movement, craft, design, branding. I'm not going to explain them. I've done it a million times. Don't skip ahead. Not going to go into more detail about that. What is important, though, is each factor contributes to cost, but it also affects the range for pricing in different ways. Simply put, some things cost more to do because they're harder to do, but not all things that you do that are harder to do allow you to charge a whole lot more, because customers value different things differently. An example: a sunroof in a car is something people are willing to pay more for, and it's a feature that customers see as a premium luxury. So car makers can mark up that as an add-on much more than a lot of other things. But air conditioning, it's not really a premium luxury feature. You can charge an add-on for it, but there's a limit to what people think is reasonable. Don't you agree? So for the manufacturing of the movement and the externals, a milled clasp versus a stamped clasp is going to be more expensive to manufacture. But I'd argue that most people don't see a milled clasp as a premium feature anymore. It's a feature that's expected for a good watch. Pin and collar versus screwed links. It's not really a premium feature, even though one is probably better than the other. What about titanium? I think people have been convinced that it has a premium label on it that potentially allows for a higher price. Gold, definitely. Saratsu polishing, maybe. One of the things I do when I'm down at an AD is I listen to what the sales rep says, and I listen for those talking points, because they'll tend to emphasize the elements that are building the argument for the higher price. Same thing goes for movements. Blued screws, anglage, Côte de Genève, display case bag, custom rotor. COSC, I don't think allows for a big premium price bump. COSC certification, you basically take the same base movement, but it costs more to regulate it more stringently. Then you have to pay to get it certified, and you have to factor in the failure rate of movements that don't pass the certification. That adds cost. But I don't think it's a premium feature. METAS might be a premium feature, but METAS is even more stringent, so you have to factor in that not all your watches are going to pass the test. That's a cost. A pretty movement does allow you to premiumize the price. A couple of gold components definitely allow you to premiumize more. There are tons of these things. If you want a ceramic bracelet and you want it polished, you can do it the cheap way or you can do it the expensive way. You throw the components into a tumbler and you'll get a really good polish. You'll also polish a lot of the components at once, which lowers the cost, but you do compromise because you get a rounded edge because the polishing process will round the edges. If you want high polished ceramics with sharp bezels and varying polishing techniques, then you can't do it with a tumbler. You need to go through a CNC machine or some other process that possibly involves human hands. And that's slower and that's more expensive. Hand polishing, it adds massive cost, but at some points people don't understand the value of that. I think Rolex is a brilliant example of this mechanism in play. If you look at a Rolex, one thing that really drives up both the production cost but also the ability to premiumize is that despite the watches being mass produced, they don't really skimp on the details. So you've got a bicolor ceramic bezel, which is finicky and difficult to do. You've got a laser etched rehaut. You've got tons of detail. You've got marker sharpness. You've got Rolex etching on the crystal. You've got white gold plots. All of these details individually cost something, but how much of them individually allow for a price premium? One of the ways Rolex gets to charge the premium is because they do a lot of these things. They don't just do one thing. They do not skimp. But in general, can the one individual thing justify a price premium? Probably not. Why? Another example. Zenith has their triple calendar Chronomaster that costs $14,000. Recently, they released a limited edition model with a lapis lazuli stone dial for almost $21,000. That's $7,000 more for a stone dial. Do you think a fairly cheap stone like lapis lazuli adds $7,000 or even a proportionate level of cost to the manufacturing? No. I even asked 2 different specialists in dial making.
You serious?
And they both fell off the chair when I told them about the Zenith. They cracked up laughing and said, what, 8K extra for a stone dial? That's premiumization. That's something where they're trying to convince people that this is worth so much more than the actual production cost. Generally, you can't tack on a lot of surplus profit to most manufacturing because people don't understand the difference and don't always appreciate the difference. Especially in the last 2 years, base manufacturing has become so relatively good that features have become so commonplace that it's harder and harder to justify a premium for a lot of these components and manufacturing related features. Having said that, Rolex again is a good example of how they're pushing the envelope on production to justify those premiums. The Land Dweller has a 5 Hz movement with superlative chronometer accuracy. The chicken wire dial utilizes a new and complex technique. The display case back is new for them. The new bracelet involves a significant amount of cost. All of those things are there to justify the Rolex premium. So it's kind of a circular thing. Premium features allow you to charge a premium price, but when you have a premium positioning, it forces you to develop your premium offerings to continue to justify your premium price. Design also has a price, but probably even more than those base manufacturing elements, it's undervalued at most price points. Design is only valuable when the designer allows for a bigger premium. It's only when you get to the high end and name brands like Jean and Grüppel-Force and Acrivia and I don't know how to say his name, start getting mentioned that people really are willing to pay. There are a couple of smaller ones. Kudoke can get away with it, others as well. But generally, a sub 5K brand is not going to be able to charge extra for design. A few do succeed, but generally it's really dependent on the Genta name or the George Smith name or whoever. That's how elusive and rare the premium is for design because it's so attached to the designer. Handmade costs money. And if they work in the East West, it's even more expensive. Hand engraving, detailing, hand setting. Every single time you have a human do something in the process, it slows things down and drives up the cost. It's slow, it reduces output, it's not ideal for mass production, so it's used sparingly. So it adds huge cost, but generally, this is one of the things that also allows you to have a broader range for pricing. Why? Because people intuitively understand that handmade is slow and meticulous. It signals care and skill and attention to detail that people are willing to pay extra for. Anordain is a really good example. Considering the movements inside their watches and their fairly basic case designs, their watches are at a first glance a bit more expensive than others. But then you think about how slow and finicky hand painting and enameling and that kind of thing is. Anordain doesn't tack on the premiumization bonus as much as Glashütte and Blancpain and Jaeger-LeCoultre do, but they probably could because people know it costs extra to take the time to do those kind of techniques. Finally, identity. A no-name brand can make the best watch on the planet, But without the brand name, they could likely not charge at a Patek or Rolex price point. It's as simple as that. High-end Chinese watches are getting really good. They are typically cheaper than comparable Western high-end watches. And that's in part because they're cheaper to make, absolutely. But it's also because there are less people that are willing to pay a Moser price or a Richard Mille price for the Chinese version. The Chinese version does not have the identity for most people that commands a premium. For me, I think identity and brand is what you in military terms would call a force multiplier. It's the X factor, and when applied appropriately, it allows you to charge a premium. It does cost you money to establish that multiplier, and the multiplier can't stand without design and manufacturing and craft that aligns with customers' expectations. But when the expectations are met, you can multiply. So basically, you've got good manufacturing, good movement, simple design, and limited craft, then that's going to be your base value. And if you put Monta on the dial, you could charge a little bit more. If you put Tudor on the dial, you could probably charge even more for the exact same watch. And if you put Rolex on the dial, you can charge even more. But as I said earlier, when it says Rolex on the dial, you can't skimp. You have to have those etched rehautes and the white gold plots and no stamping anywhere. It just has to be, people are going to be looking for the faults to a much higher degree than if it were the exact same watch and it said Monta on the dial. For me, thinking about all these things has made it so much easier to define or sort of identify the sweet spots for different elements of watches. So for movements, under $500, you should be expecting an NH35 or a similar movement. It could be quartz, but if it's a mechanical watch, it's going to be an NH35 or a Seagull ST1001 or something similar, maybe a Miyota. Power reserve right now is going to be around 40 hours of power reserve, and you're not getting much better in terms of accuracy guarantees than minus 20 to plus 40 seconds. Sometimes they will perform better than that, but importantly, brands don't guarantee better. If you move up to $1,000, you can expect a Sellita SW200 or something similar. Powermatic, for example, you're still mostly around 40 hours. You're starting to see basic display cases and simple, not particularly elaborate custom rotors. Accuracy improves and you're getting, minus 12, plus 30, maybe some minus 12, plus 20. As you go up in the grades of the movements, accuracy improves, finishing improves, anti-magnetism improves, reliability improves. ETA have their comparable offerings in the Powermatic 80 at this price point. You get more power reserve, but you also get more synthetic components in the cheapest grade of the watch. There's a bit of a compromise. More power reserve, less sturdy movement, on balance. COSC certification starts to kick in around $1,500 and above, give or take. Power reserve starts to increase as well. Anti-magnetism, all those kind of COSC type features start to get really strong in watches above $1,500. Then you get to $5,000 for a Tudor with a full META certification, -4, +6, I think it is. 15,000 gauss tested in the case. IWC has their 120-hour movement at $6,000. At $13,000 for Rolex, you still get a Metis comparable superlative chronometer with about 100 hours of power reserve, 5 hertz, of course. But the point is, the pure movement reliability, accuracy, power reserve, quality assurance doesn't really get much better over $3,000-4,000. From the Tudor Metas movement to the Rolex, the price is a $6,000 price difference. On paper, the difference in the movements is relatively small. The Kinesi is not a good-looking movement, but just in terms of pure, sort of quality of what it can do, the difference between them is not that huge. There are differences, and I do stand by also an Omega being better. They're more reliable. They're also much prettier than the Kinesi movements. The Rolexes are also more solid than a Tudor. But I can't in any way argue for there being a $6,000 improvement on the movements. So for movements, the best value for money in terms of what is around and in terms of price to performance ratio is somewhere between $1,500 and $5,000, somewhere in that range. Manufacturing. If you put a blindfold on and were asked to handle a Rolex and a Tudor and an Omega, so $10,000, $6,500, and $5,000 for a diver, would you be able to tell the quality difference of the bracelet, case, or crystal? My guess is most people wouldn't. I mean, you guys would because you're insane and you just touch it like, that's the helium escape valve, that's the Seamaster, and you would touch over here and you say, that's an oyster bracelet. But normal people that have lives would not be able to tell the difference. Nerds, for sure, but regular people, they wouldn't. And what about Tudor, a Formex Reef, and some Chinese factory brand? Blindfolded. It's going to be hard. And I admit it, it's going to be difficult. Give me time and I will find the difference. But on a lot of things, it's really hard. Unblindfolded, it's a little bit easier, but a Rolex versus an Omega is still not an easy comparison. Getting into the details of a Rolex, there are going to be so many micro details that add cost, but how many percent more precise is the bezel action of a Rolex than on a Tudor? And how much of that is down to quality and just down to how the brand wants the bezel action to feel? I've handled a Girard-Perregaux ceramic Laureato, a Zenith Defy ceramic, and a Formex Ceramica. There's not a lot in it, if anything. And there's $15,000 between the cheapest and most expensive watch. Now, there's movement differences, but I'm just talking about sort of, if you look at the things in isolation, there are differences for sure, but it's really close. But you still get brands below $2,000 that offer a stamped clasp. You still get sub $1,000 watches with jangly bracelets with pins and collars. Micro Adjust isn't consistently available below $2,000. Some brands are going to have it, but they might cut corners somewhere else. And on the other end of the scale, above $4,000 or $5,000, tell me what you consistently get more of that is noticeably and markedly better. Can you tell that a $10,000 Reverso is better manufactured than a Tudor? I mean, it's a hard comparison, but it's really difficult to tell for a normal person at least. The sweet spot right now where the price and performance are optimally balanced is somewhere between 2 and 4K for those kind of manufacturing things. The point is, on the manufacturing, it kicks in a little bit later than movements, but it balances out a little bit earlier. Craft. Atelier Wen offers a hand-turned guilloche dial at $3,000. Formex offers not a handmade, but a technically impressive gold Meteor dial at $2,500. The CW12 at $5,000 has hand-polished and faceted beveling on the case and also, I think, the balance bridge. Those examples are actually few and far between. There's no hand-engraved swan neck regulator on a watch under $2,000. At least, I mean, there might be one, but it's not consistent at all, and it's incredibly rare. It's not even consistently available all the way up to Rolex pricing, and that should tell you something. An Omega Metas movement is good looking, but the detailing is, to my knowledge, entirely done by machine. And Ordain, they do manual or hand enameling at $3,000, $4,000. The biggest, most impressive feature of the new Breitling B31 movements is the level of anglage, Côte de Genève, and engraving that has gone into that movement. A lot of that is machined, so it's not quite craft, but that's a part of the reason why Breitling believe they can charge $6,200 for a new Super Ocean Heritage. The reality is, craft is relatively uncommon below even $10,000. If it's in there, it's sparing and focused on one or two things. It's a dial or hands or a single engraving and a spiff-duff movement. It's not like a highly complicated Lange where every single component has passed through the hands of a professional. But there is a sweet spot where you get a lot of craft for your money. And it starts around the Glashütte Original level of $10,000, $13,000, and it stops at the lower end of Lange and Söhne, so $20,000, $25,000. That's where I do believe you're getting the most craft for the least amount of money. Above that price point, it's an entirely different game. When you go above $25,000, you really have diminishing returns. I think a Grüppel Force handmade for $1 million is probably entirely justified, but the sweet spot is from Glashütte to low-end Lange with a dip below for, I'd say, one brand only, Grand Seiko. With them on craft and sort of the Venn diagram overlapping to manufacturing, Grand Seiko do outperform more or less any Western brand. Two more things to go. Design. Design is everywhere. There's the unmentionable color brand, which I believe has strong designs for $600. Tissot also makes nice watches at $600 to $1,200 and above. But I would argue that below a certain point, brands do not tend to be as consistent. Orient, Citizen, Seiko, Hamilton also have some real dogs in their lineup. The lower end price you get, the more you are in the volume and options game as a manufacturer with consumers. And that does tend to lead to bigger product catalogs with less consistent designs and design languages. I think the cutoff point is around $1,000. Above $1,000, you do start to get more consistent in design quality. The designs might not be to your taste, but there's just more consistency and coherence in product catalogs. This stays the case all the way up to the most expensive watches. You could make a case, I think, that below 4K, there are more brands that are a little bit more derivative and inspired by others, and that is, I think, likely to some extent true. From $1,000 to $4,000, you're still competing for customers who want a nice black dial diver or a nice blue dial sports watch or a nice waffle dial integrated bracelet watch. So in this space, brands do tend to sort of aesthetically converge a little bit. The counter argument, though, is that these brands are often only seen as derivative because there are more new brands in this space and brands with less heritage and less storytelling attached to them. The fact is, even a Submariner is ultimately derivative of something else. Where does the price or force multiplier for identity kick in? I'm going to throw out a hard number and say $3,000. Above the higher end of Longines types watches, brands start to command a premium. And if you asked me 2 years ago, I was convinced it was Tudor where you were getting more watch than brand, but I don't think it's the case anymore. Tudor's a phenomenal brand, they still are. They make great watches, but they're not the value choice anymore. There's these days a definite premium there. I also think they know they're still popular. So over 3K or so, identity really starts to pump the price. And this is an opinion, but I'd like to state it almost as a fact. Longines, Formex, Christopher Ward, Anno Dane, great watches, but they're not so good that they can command a huge premium for their name. Rolex is so far outside of the sweet spot that it's almost ridiculous. Omega is also charging a premium for their name. And I repeat, these brands' watches are better for sure on almost every single parameter, and that does make them more expensive to make. But they are not $6,000 better than a comparable Tudor. They are not $8,000 better than a comparable Longines. So from $0 to $1,500, you will get less than stellar movements. You can get absolutely excellent manufacturing, but it's not a consistent characteristic of the price range. Sometimes it is, but not consistently so. Design can be good, but it's also potentially not consistently good. There's no craft of any type to speak of, and you pay next to nothing for identity. You also pay no premium for distribution and fancy stores. Above $3,000, you more or less consistently get really good movements. But there are a few exceptions. You get excellent manufacturing with tons of micro detailing. You get cork sniffing worthy details to the manufactured product that raise them above $1,000 or $3,000 watches. But you do need to really pay attention to notice. You still don't get consistent craft. That only kicks in at $12,000 to $13,000 and above. When you do see it, it's rare and focused to a few things of the watch. And then there's $1,500 to $3,000. Cost movements, good power reserves, consistent premium manufacturing with modern day features, quick releases, easy adjusts, aligned bezels, crisp details, precise plots, hands. You get an investment in consistent design. You get a lot of direct-to-consumer brands that can offer a competitive price because they're not sharing profits with a retailer that also wants a cut. And none of these brands really have a name that commands a massive premium yet. Even sometimes not being a premium brand is part of their value proposition. So if I were today in 2025 to give an answer to the question, where can I get a really good value watch with all the modern features that could potentially last me a lifetime for a competitive price, I would say somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000-ish. Maybe $4,000, not higher. And who's in this space? Formex, Christopher Ward, Longines, Anno Dane, Zinn, Hanhart, Nomos, Atelier Wen, Louis Erard, sometimes Frédéric Constant. Above this point, you get fabulous watches from Tudor and Omega and Glashütte, but you're on the steep end of the curve of diminishing returns. $1,500 to $3,000, $4,000-ish. That's where the sweet spot is at. Now, outside of this price range, I think there are a couple of brands where you get, let's call it, more than the rest at similar prices. Grand Seiko is still to this day priced really well for the overall feature and quality set from end to end. Glashütte Original as well. They are expensive, but they have elements of craft and attentions to detail that makes them really compelling, especially compared to, cousins over at Swatch Group like Blancpain. Breitling has never been cheap, or maybe they were one sometime, but they haven't been for a long time. But with the new B31 movements, I don't think they're value for money, but their offering has definitely improved compared to what it has been for a lot of years. Under $1,000, a couple of Chinese brands do punch above their weight. They're not perfect, but they have strengths. I doubt they make much money on their consumer offerings. Their profit comes from producing for other brands, and the consumer offerings, as far as I can tell, are just there to stick it a little bit to the Swiss brands and function as a showcase for people who want to have things manufactured by them. Their movements are generally forgettable. Their designs are, blatantly derivative at best, but credit where credit is due. They are usually pretty solid. A lot of Chinese brands are crap, but there are a couple in between that are really, really strong. High-end, Moser, relatively reasonable, all things considered. IWC, also offering a lot these days. 6,000 for a IWC Pilot Mark 20 is the same as an Aquaterra, is the same as a Breitling Top Tying, is a little bit less than a Oyster Perpetual. No, not an Oyster Perpetual. Yes, an Oyster Perpetual. You're paying for the brand name, but overall you get a strong package. If you want to know where I think performance and price is out of sync, Panerai still has too many shortcuts. Jaeger-LeCoultre still off balance in terms of pricing relative to quality. Their more unique offerings are really compelling, but the core catalog to me feels out of sync. Blancpain completely off sync. Bremont off sync. Seiko out of sync in their cheapest offerings. When you get to the SPBs and the SJE models, it's fine, but a lot of their sub 1K offerings are just quality-wise not competitive. That's where I think we are right now. I hope you leave having a better idea of what to expect and what to look for. Share your thoughts in the comments. Expand on my thinking and add your perspectives. That's why we're here. Elaborate in the comments below. Like I said, subscribe. Cheers.